Hey there, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a source document that is, well, it's highly unconventional and honestly, very controversial. We're going to unpack a physiological hypothesis that totally flips the mainstream medical narrative on its head, specifically when it comes to metabolism, the role of sugar, and what diabetes actually is. Now, just to be clear, my goal today isn't to validate or debunk this. We're just neutrally breaking down the exact logic and the specific concepts the author presents, so we can map out this radically different perspective together. To really wrap our heads around this material, I'm going to ask you to do something a bit challenging. I need you to temporarily set aside everything you know about conventional medical wisdom. Just for the next few minutes, let's step completely inside the distinct logic of this text. The entire framework basically hinges on one massive central question. What if diabetes isn't a single disease with a single cause, but actually a really complex, misunderstood syndrome? So, here's our roadmap for how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at sugar as the primary nutrient. Then, we'll dive into the mechanics of red blood cells. Third, we'll explore the battle between insulin and cortisone. And finally, we'll look at how this source completely redefines the diabetes syndrome. Let's get right to it. All right, starting off with section 1, sugar as the primary nutrient. Okay, so to understand where this source thinks modern medicine went off track, we actually have to look backward. The author argues that way back in the 1870s, when symptoms like frequent urination and weight loss were first linked to sugar in the urine, it caused this massive dietary shift. Doctors started pushing patients away from sugar and heavily toward fats. Fast forward to the 1920s, and scientists discover that insulin injections lowered blood sugar. But the source asserts that instead of actually curing a disease, this discovery mistakenly framed insulin as a permanent fix. And this, they argue, is what ultimately set the stage for the complex, cascading metabolic syndromes we see today. This is a huge claim because it reframes our entire approach to metabolic health. So treating diabetes by just cutting out sugar? According to this source, that is a completely flawed approach. In fact, the text asserts something that would probably shock most modern dietitians, that sugar is actually the absolute fundamental nutrient. They argue it's literally the original food for every single living cell on Earth, from tiny bacteria all the way up to human brain cells. The author's point is that cells simply cannot function without it. Sugar enters our cells automatically, out of pure biological necessity. Moving right along to section 2, the cellular mechanics of red blood cells. Now, I want you to think of red blood cells kind of like strict automated delivery trucks. They aren't making decisions. They just follow the current in this continuous mechanical loop. Step 1. The hemoglobin inside the red blood cell picks up oxygen and glucose. Step 2. This cargo travels via the plasma right into the interstitial tissue. Step 3. It drops off those crucial nutrients to feed the cells. And finally, step 4. It loops back, but this time carrying waste like carbon dioxide and water. The author really emphasizes that this relentless delivery system is driven by the body's absolute, non-negotiable demand for sugar and oxygen. To really put the sheer scale of this physiological process into perspective, check out this staggering claim from the text. Every single day, your body breaks down and remodels 200 billion red blood cells. 200 billion. That is just an astronomical amount of cellular turnover happening inside you every 24 hours. And that massive cellular turnover directly connects to systemic waste. The author makes a very specific claim here. As those 200 billion cells mature and die every single day, their broken nuclei release DNA. That DNA is then converted into purines, which ultimately produce your acid. So the text is arguing that high uric acid isn't really a dietary mistake at all. Rather, it's just the natural baseline result of billions of your own cells dying and releasing their genetic material every single day. Okay, let's zoom back out to the hormonal level for section 3, insulin versus cortisol. This is where the source draws a super stark and definitely controversial contrast. It describes insulin not as a life-saving cure, but actually as a fat-storing threat. The author claims insulin is the sole hormone responsible for causing obesity, preventing fat breakdown, and even triggering dangerous physical reactions like freezing, spasms, or comas by dropping your blood sugar way too sharply. On the flip side, it completely inverts conventional wisdom by framing cortisone as the body's true savior. In this hypothesis, cortisone is the crucial counteragent that safely raises blood sugar and rescues the body from those overpowering effects of insulin. In fact, the text points to an entire arsenal of what it calls anti-insulin hormones. We're talking cortisone, adrenaline, thyroid growth hormone, glucagon, and testosterone, and their shared primary function, raising blood sugar. The author's overarching point here is that the human body is heavily designed and equipped with multiple overlapping systems specifically to raise blood sugar, not lower it, which, really questions the intense modern medical focus on insulin. Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, redefining the diabetes syndrome. Building on all this cellular and hormonal foundation, the author argues that diagnosing a diverse set of symptoms simply as diabetes caused by high sugar is a fundamental medical error. Instead, they insist on using the term metabolic syndrome. Under this definition, it's a cluster of recurring symptoms that happen to appear together, things like high blood pressure, premature aging, or heart issues. But the key here is that they actually stem from completely unrelated original causes within the body's systems, not from sugar toxicity. It's fascinating to see how the framing of this syndrome has evolved and exactly how the author criticizes it. Historically, it was called nutrient syndrome, blaming things like obesity and waist circumference. Today, it's branded metabolic syndrome, blaming oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, or genetics. But this source heavily rejects modern concepts like genetic predisposition and insulin resistance. Actually, the author argues these terms are essentially just medical excuses, labels used when doctors can't quite explain the cascading physical deterioration happening in the syndrome. To explain that physical deterioration, the author uses a really startling metaphor, a horse in the belly. Just picture that. It describes how abdominal bloating and pressure physically push up against the organs, the diaphragm, and the heart. This creates a chain reaction: high blood pressure, organ stress, shortness of breath, systemic inflammation. It's this mechanical systemic pressure, the author argues, rather than the direct consumption of sugar, that's actually ruining the body over time. This whole uncompromising stance is perfectly summed up by the author in this quote. "The sugar I give in food is your food, the food of every creature on earth. So sugar is the original food." Regardless of your background or what you know about medicine, this source certainly forces us to look at the mechanics of our biology through a radically different lens. It asks us to totally question the roles of insulin, the strict mechanics of our red blood cells, and how we even define systemic illness. And it definitely leaves us with something big to ponder. How deeply do we truly understand the complex physiological science of our own metabolism?